Good morning. Thank you for watching. I'm Shakil 5858. I'm Ahmed Budnam. I am thankful to all news resources and my team. Following are the news which have been reported by American, European, Canadian, Australian, African, and Asian channels, and of course, AFP, AP, and Reuters news agencies also reported the same news. Now the news headlines. Gangs and drug cartels share in Mexico presidential elections. Navigational problems of people with disability in USA. Finding an affordable housing in US. Israeli Prime Minister rejected Mr. Biden's plan for ceasefire in Gaza. Families of hostages are protesting in Israel. Russia showered the Ukraine with 100 missiles yesterday. In South African elections, ANC party loses majority first time. Boeing first astronaut flight halted today. Anti-Semitic incidents in Canada. Healing period after mass shooting in Canada. Two key far-right ministers threaten to quit Israeli government. Labor unions on a strike in Nigeria. American family caught up in DRC queue. Now the news in detail.
Tonight, several developing stories as we come on the air. Republican leaders rally around former President Donald Trump after his criminal conviction. Some senators even threatening to stall legislation. The latest Gaza ceasefire plan are the U.S. and Israel on the same page. And breaking news from Arizona, 6 people shot, 2 killed, including an officer. First, support for the former president. GOP leaders rushing to his defense. House Speaker Mike Johnson calling for the Supreme Court to step in to overturn his conviction. Senators threatening to grind the Senate to a halt. Donations pouring into the Trump campaign, nearly $53 million since the guilty verdicts. Mary Alice Park standing by. Clashing comments on the Gaza ceasefire plan outlined by President Biden. Is the plan already in trouble? Tonight, Israel's prime minister calling it a non-starter, insisting the fighting won't stop until Israel's conditions are met, including the destruction of Hamas. Britt Clennett in Israel tonight. Dangerous weather taking aim at the nation's heartland. 7 states from the Gulf Coast to the plains, some facing flash flooding, hail, and possible tornadoes, and what has already been one of the most active tornado seasons on record. Our weather team tracking it all. Boeing's historic launch is scrubbed. The countdown halted just minutes before the Starliner was to carry 2 astronauts into space. What went wrong? Plus a massive data breach. Live Nation confirming that Ticketmaster was hacked. The information of more than 500 million customers stolen. Chad Daybell sentenced to death. The decision coming 2 days after he was convicted of killing his first wife and his second wife's 2 children. A massive water outage in Atlanta after multiple water main breaks. A hospital relocating patients, residents warned to boil water. And America strong tonight, the Cinderella story in college baseball. The unlikely team turning heads in the World Series, competing after the university closed its doors. From ABC News World.
Tonight on PBS News Weekend, against a backdrop of increasing gang and cartel violence, what's at stake in Mexico's largest election ever? Then, how people with disabilities are navigating relaxed COVID precautions.
For many of us, we don't have the luxury to think that COVID, as a public health situation, is past us. And so it's been very isolating seeing the national discourse turn in that way.
And what's keeping rents high, and what could be done to help those struggling to find affordable housing?
To your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Good evening, I'm John Yang. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has thrown up a hurdle to President Biden's proposed path to ending the war in Gaza. He said there can be no permanent ceasefire until Hamas's military and governing capabilities are destroyed. In a statement, Netanyahu said the notion that Israel will agree to a permanent ceasefire before these conditions are fulfilled is a non-starter. On Friday, Mr. Biden said Israel's bombardment of Gaza has left Hamas no longer capable of another large-scale attack on Israel like October 7th, and that it is time for this war to end. The families of Israelis held hostage in Gaza called on both Israel and Hamas to take the deal. Hamas said it views the president's proposal positively, as do many war-weary Gaza residents.
This proposal came late, but better late than never. We hope from God, the American administration, and the European community in general
Address a joint meeting of the House and Senate. A barrage of 100 Russian missiles and drones targeted the power grid across Ukraine today. At least 19 people were injured, 8 of them children. The attack came as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is attending a defense summit in Singapore. He's trying to convince more Asian and Western countries to supply weapons to his country and cut ties with Moscow. South Africa's ANC party has lost its majority in parliament for the first time since the end of white minority rule 30 years ago. The party once led by Nelson Mandela got just over 40% of the vote in national elections this week. South Africa is struggling with high unemployment, electricity and water shortages, and rampant crime. And an attempt to launch Boeing's first astronaut flight was called off at the last minute today, the latest in years of technical problems and costly delays for the Starliner project. The astronauts were in the capsule on the launch pad and just minutes away from heading to the International Space Station when a computer detected a problem and shut down the countdown at 3 minutes 50 seconds. It's one more bit of unwelcome news for Boeing, whose commercial airliners have been scrutinized for safety issues. Still to come on PBS News Weekend, what relaxed COVID guidelines mean for people with disabilities, and why rents are still higher in much of the country than before the pandemic.
This is PBS News Weekend from WETA Studios in Washington, home of the PBS NewsHour, weeknights on PBS.
Tomorrow, Mexico holds the largest election of its history, nearly 100 million registered voters. The legacy of outgoing President Manuel Lopez Obrador looms large over the balloting, which comes at a time of record levels of gang and cartel violence. Ali Rogan looks at what's at stake for Mexico and for the United States.
No matter the outcome in Mexico's election this Sunday, the country almost...
Thanks so much.
On the latest PBS News Weekly, Israel expands its operation into Rafah, where much of the Gazan population has been seeking refuge. All that and more is on the PBS NewsHour YouTube channel. And that is PBS News Weekend for this Saturday. On Sunday, why car thefts across America in the past 4 years have skyrocketed. I'm John Yang. For all of my colleagues, thanks for joining us. See you tomorrow.
Tonight, scrubbed. Boeing's first astronaut flight is called off minutes from liftoff.
Hold.
The company's Starliner spacecraft grounded on the launch pad again.
I'm Manuel Bojorquez at Kennedy Space Center with more on the problem that prompted that last-minute decision and when they may try again.
Also tonight, Israelis demand a hostage deal with Hamas as Benjamin Netanyahu rejects a peace plan for Gaza. Trump supporters take to social media to share their displeasure after his conviction. We head to a key battleground state for reaction.
I'm Nicole Killian in Allentown, Pennsylvania, with swing voters' take on the Trump verdict. Could it change minds in the race for the White House?
Judgment Day, Doomsday author Chad Daybell is sentenced to death in Idaho for killing his first wife and his then-girlfriend's 2 children. Severe storms, heavy rain, damaging winds set to impact the west and south. We'll track it. Heroes welcome. 80 years after D-Day, these Americans return to France to revisit the site of their greatest glory. And later, outlaw otter. She's back after evading capture in California. Keep an eye on your surfboard.
This is the CBS Weekend News from Washington.
On this Saturday night, a critical condition in the latest ceasefire proposal. With Gaza grappling, world leaders push for a deal between Israel and Hamas.
It's time for this war to end.
As Ottawa vows to crack down on anti-Semitic attacks on home soil. Liftoff called off.
Hold.
Boeing's first crewed Starliner launch scrubbed in the final minutes. Political tides turn in South Africa. The party once led by Nelson Mandela loses its 30-year parliamentary majority. From tragedy to hope.
To redefine what this place is and not be defined by a couple hours of time.
How a new community center in Portapique is helping people heal after Canada's worst mass shooting.
Global National with Farah Nasser, reporting tonight. Meet through gunshot.
You are looking at a shot of smoke rising from the direction of Rafah this morning as Israel's military offensive in the war-ravaged Gaza Strip continues. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians have been displaced from the town in southern Gaza. But today, amid the misery there, a glimmer of hope. Good evening, and thank you for joining us. Israel proposing a draft ceasefire plan calling for an immediate 6-week halt to the hostilities. The first phase involves a partial withdrawal of Israeli forces from areas of Gaza and the release of some hostages in exchange for Palestinian prisoners and humanitarian aid. There is, however, one big sticking point. Israel refuses to make any deal so long as Hamas is in power. David Baxter has our top story tonight.
Israel continues its push into southern Gaza near Rafah, even after U.S. President Joe Biden goes. Now, there are reports coming out of Egypt that their officials are set to meet with U.S. and Israeli counterparts on Sunday about reopening the Rafah crossing. David Baxter, Global News, Ottawa.
There are growing calls for the federal government to take action and enforce the law following a string of incidents this week that has left Canada's Jewish community shaken. A synagogue in Vancouver was the latest target of an attack the police say is being investigated as a possible hate crime. They suspect an accelerant was used to intentionally set a fire at the front door of the building. It comes after bullet holes were found at 2 Jewish schools in Toronto and Montreal. No one was hurt in any of the incidents. Mercedes Stevenson took the Jewish community's concerns directly to Canada's Justice Minister. Mercedes?
Neither, over the past week, there have been 3 significant anti-Semitic attacks. Bullets fired into 2 Jewish schools and an incendiary device deployed at a synagogue. Canada's special envoy to combat anti-Semitism, Deborah Lyons, has come out with strong words for all levels of government, saying that they must do more. In a statement, Lyons says changes to bail and dealing with repeat offenders. Neither?
All right, Mercedes Stevenson in Ottawa. Thanks, Mercedes. And as Mercedes mentioned, you can watch the entire interview with Arif Irani tomorrow morning on the West Block right here on Global. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is back in Asia to rally more support for his country's defense. Zelensky arrived in Singapore today for the Shangri-La Dialogue, an international security summit mostly attended by Asia-Pacific countries. He's hoping to garner their support for an upcoming peace summit against Russia's war. It will take place in Switzerland later this month. Zelensky will also meet with the U.S. Secretary of Defense to further discuss the battlefield situation in Ukraine.
I actually raised that concern of foreign interference and all the manifestations that it might take. I made it very clear that those actions by any foreign nation are unacceptable to Canada. And
Defense Minister Bill Blair also at the summit. In a rare meeting with his Chinese counterpart, Blair warned Beijing against any attempts to interfere with Canadian institutions. This comes weeks after a Foreign Interference Commission highlighted evidence by CSIS of countries like China meddling in Canada's last two elections, but ultimately not affecting the final results. Boeing's latest attempt to launch its Starliner spacecraft was scrubbed in the final minutes before liftoff today. It was not immediately clear why, but the spacecraft has never flown with astronauts on board, so the stakes are high. NASA has scheduled a backup launch for tomorrow, but as Jamie Dahl reports, it's just another setback in a long list of delays and disruptions for Boeing.
All right, they're all zipped up.
You could almost feel the hearts pumping with every tick of the clock. History on the verge of being made.
Now, Sunny will be the first woman to test an orbital spacecraft.
Every system good to go.
Pneumatics. Go. LO2. Go. Water. Go.
Even the final message from the astronauts strapped tightly in their seats.
Take us to space and back.
And with that, we are ready to go to space, Lauren.
Everyone held their breaths. The clock stopped.
Clock stopped at T-minus 3 minutes 50 seconds.
The anticipation climbed, but it was the only thing that would get off the ground on Saturday in Cape Canaveral.
There you heard confirmation of the scrub call.
3 minutes and 50 seconds to liftoff. Dreams of the Boeing Starliner ferrying 2 astronauts to the International Space Station remain just that. A dream, still yet to be realized by NASA and Boeing.
We just heard an update from United Launch Alliance, who's the builder of the rocket. The ground launch sequencer, that's a computer that controls the terminal phase of the countdown, the final few minutes, obviously encountered a problem of some sort.
It's just the latest in a string of setbacks for the historic project and Boeing, which has dealt with years of delays due to mechanical and software issues and budget overruns. The initial first crewed launch attempt was scrubbed on May 6th after a valve issue.
It's really important to the company to get this thing off the ground successfully and get it back successfully. Had all kinds of problems with other parts of their management structure. So this one's kind of a very visible embarrassment, I would expect.
The Starliner would be a direct competitor with Elon Musk's SpaceX, which has been flying people to and from the space station for NASA since 2020. Dodge says unlike SpaceX, which lands in water, the Starliner would land in the Utah desert, but it needs to get out of Florida first. The next launch attempt could be as early as Sunday. Jamie Dahl, Global News, Calgary.
South Africa's coalition challenge coming up with rival parties gaining momentum. The country's political landscape shifts for the first time post-apartheid.
Yango.
The final phase of the world's largest election came to an end today in India. Nearly 1 billion people were eligible to vote in the 6-week-long process, which began on April 19th. Tens of millions battled sweltering heat to cast their ballots in the final round of voting. At least 30 deaths have been attributed to the record-breaking temperatures since Friday. Incumbent Prime Minister Narendra Modi is widely expected to secure another term in office, with official results set to be announced on Tuesday. In South Africa, reaction is pouring into what's already been a historic election. For the first time since the end of apartheid, the nation's leading party will be forced to form a coalition government. The African National Congress has held a majority in every election going back to 1994. But now the party of Nelson Mandela will be forced to work with a rival to stay in power. Kyle Benning has more on what led to the change and which parties could play kingmaker.
He's the face of a political change in South Africa, despite being very familiar with voters across the country. The newly formed MK party under former President Jacob Zuma has pulled enough support away from the African national voters back to the polls. Kyle Benning, Global News, Toronto.
Rainbow flags filled the streets of Thailand's capital today as Pride celebrations kicked off there and elsewhere around the globe. Thailand is on course to become the first nation in Southeast Asia to legalize same-sex marriage, marking a significant social stride forward compared to the discrimination faced by the LGBTQ2+ community in Thailand a decade ago. The country's marriage equality bill overwhelmingly passed the upper house's first reading in April and is widely expected to be ratified by the country's Senate later this month, before being given royal assent by Thailand's king. Ahead, Temu, China's leading e-commerce app, is facing legal scrutiny over privacy concerns. Ticketmaster's parent company has confirmed it was hit by a data breach earlier this week after hackers claimed to have stolen the personal data of 560 million customers. In a regulatory filing to the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, Live Nation says a criminal threat actor is offering to sell Ticketmaster data on the dark web, and the company is investigating. A group named Shiny Hunters has claimed responsibility for the attack. They're seeking $500,000 for the data, which could include customers' names, addresses, and credit card details. This week, the parent company of Temu dethroned Alibaba as China's most valuable e-commerce firm. The widely popular online shopping app is under scrutiny for the way it allegedly collects data from people who download it. Temu is currently facing 2 lawsuits in the U.S. as well as one in Canada. Anne Gaviola has more on why privacy experts, legal teams, and cybersecurity analysts are sounding the alarm about this app.
Feels like a dream, feels like magic. Temu spent millions to advertise at the Super Bowl this year.
Sounds like a billionaire.
The e-commerce app pulls out all the stops to entice new customers. It was the most downloaded app in the U.S. last year.
Buyer beware.
This criminologist and cybersecurity expert has analyzed the Temu app and has major concerns about user privacy because of its parent company, PDD Holdings, a Chinese online retailer. This app has seen explosive popularity since it came to the U.S. in 2022.
These companies are compelled by the CCP or the Chinese government to give over information. It should raise some alarms to users.
A Temu spokesperson tells Global News it has never provided user data to the Chinese government, nor would it do so if asked. Temu faces 2 proposed U.S. class action lawsuits lawsuits and one proposed in Quebec, alleging it collects more data from its users than is necessary.
The Quebec suit alleges location data about where you've been physically, as well as what you've browsed online. Plus, all your contact information and other things on your mobile device may be compromised if you've downloaded Temu, even if you've never purchased anything.
Attorney Jeff Orenstein filed the case in March on behalf of anyone who has used Temu, as well as anyone they've interacted with since.
Some of the allegations are that even those communications can end up being intercepted, or private information being intercepted at the very least, and could potentially be shared with third parties.
In a statement to Global News, Temu says it categorically denies the allegations in these lawsuits and intends to vigorously defend against them. Temu says it only uses precise location services in the Middle East region, nowhere else. The company says it is transparent about its data practices, but like other e-commerce apps, it does work with third-party service providers and ensures they only have access to personal information needed to perform their functions and services. Nevertheless, Temu's strategy and business model is raising a lot of questions, both in Canada and the US. Anne Gaviola, Global News, Toronto.
Next, how Portapic is transforming tragedy into triumph with a new community revival project. Today, mourners, including a who's who of dignitaries in Quebec, gathered for his funeral in downtown Montreal. Jean-Pierre Ferland was 89 years old. In April of 2020, a lone gunman went on a deadly rampage in Nova Scotia, killing 22 people over the span of 13 hours. It became the worst mass shooting in modern Canadian history. The carnage changed the lives of countless people. As Heidi Petrachik tells us, the small community where the violence began is now trying to redefine itself beyond the tragedy.
If you stand up for those down on the knees.
A song dedicated to Nova Scotians was the soundtrack for a day people here have needed for so long. Just down the road from this new community center in rural Portapic is where the April 2020 mass shooting began, a lone gunman killing 22 people.
Jolene Oliver, Aaron Tuck, and Emily Tuck.
The names of those killed read out here today.
We all had a terrifying night, the night of the mass casualty.
Andrew McDonald is a survivor shot by the perpetrator. He lived, and the Portapic resident wanted to turn fear into hope.
For us to redefine what this place is and not be defined by a couple hours of time is really important to us.
He and other volunteers looked to the community hall as the place to start. They decided to rebuild, taking century-old beams from the old one to become part of the new.
And then as people's asks got bigger and the need got bigger, the project got bigger, and it just kept growing and growing from there.
It's allowed the community to have a focal point, something positive to focus on, and it's really about changing the narrative around Portapic.
The space will be used for mental health supports, community gatherings, dances, a farmer's market. Almost $1.5 million in government funds and donations raised to make it happen.
There's healing in being able to do something.
And Portapic has been here for a long time and will continue to be here for a long time.
The community focused on a brighter future instead of that brief window of darkness in the past. Heidi Petrachik, Global News, Portapic, Nova Scotia.
And that is Global National for this Saturday night. I'm Neetu Garcha. Tonight's Your Canada is the East Block of Parliament Hill in Ottawa. We love seeing your Canada. Please keep emailing your photos to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks so much for watching, and hope you'll join us again tomorrow. Have a great night.
Welcome back. Anti-Israeli protests raging for months across college campuses. I'm talking about across the country, taking people by surprise. Many people by surprise, including me. The campus chaos leading to thousands of arrests, many suspensions, and many Ivy League schools like Columbia even canceling traditional graduation ceremonies, essentially caving to the pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian mobs. But my next guest says none of this should be a surprise. Thanks to his original supporting, you're about to find out why. He is calling out Columbia University specifically for cultivating the precise conditions that allowed hate to flourish. And nothing's changed. Chris Rufo writing in part this: the university built massive departments to advance post-colonials, spent hundreds of millions of dollars on diversity, equity, and inclusion, I know, and glorify new left-style student activism as the telos of university life. Joining us right now is Manhattan Institute senior fellow and City Journal contributing editor Chris Rufo. Chris, so you went in and found out what the staff, the faculty at Columbia has been teaching its students. What did you learn?
That's right. Columbia has been really the leading university in the United States pushing what's called post-colonial theory. It's also known as decolonization theory. The idea is that Israel and also the United States are illegitimate oppressor nations that have illegitimately seized land and territory, whether in the United States or in current-day Israel, and they have to be resisted by physical force, by violence, whether it's by indigenous movements in the United States or the Palestinians overseas. Columbia has spent hundreds of millions of dollars on a DEI infrastructure promoting this kind of ideology. They've hired dozens of radical left-wing decolonial scholars, and they're pushing this ideology for decades. And so it was only a matter of time before it would flare up like we've seen in recent months.
Yeah, you said 100. The DEI program, you found out 185 million into it. Do you believe that? So when did this start?
This started actually in the early 2000s. That's when they really established these first DEI programs. They're spending tens of millions of dollars a year now on these programs. And look, they don't advance scholarship. They don't advance knowledge. They aren't about effective teaching in the classroom. They're about making the entire administration, the entire university really, a home for left-wing political activism. And if that's not bad enough, taxpayers are subsidizing this kind of ideology with billions of dollars across all of the Ivy League institutions. And so when you're seeing these campus protests, when you're seeing these radical anti-Israel rhetoric, taxpayers should know that you are in part footing the bill.
It's unbelievable because we also have to find out who's donating to these schools outside our country. The UAE, Saudi Arabia. Where's this donor list? You found both of them have donated substantially, and that seems to be their philosophy in their own countries. Among the people upset on the left is Senator John Fetterman. He was given an honorary degree from Yeshiva, and you see what he does. He takes off his Harvard hood. Watch.
And for me personally, I do not fundamentally believe that it's right for me to wear this today.
So he was honored for standing up for Israel by Yeshiva, and they gave him a sustained applause. Bill Maher also, somebody from the left who doesn't understand where this came from. Are we beginning to turn the page on this now that we have the spotlight on it?
Yeah, I think we are. We're seeing pressure, moving from right to left, where even people in the reasonable center are now seeing exactly what's been going on campuses. And whether it's John Fetterman or Bill Maher, these are people who should have seen it coming. Many of us have been warning about these precise conditions that have been created on campuses. And that said, however, we have to welcome them into this big coalition because, look, here's the fundamental thing that people need to understand. Anti-Semitism on campus is the smallest nesting doll. The second one is kind of anti-white, anti-European sentiment. And the third one is anti-American and anti-West sentiment. These are all nesting doll ideologies. These are all part and parcel. They go together. We have to not only defeat one of them, we have to defeat all of them, and we'll welcome anyone into our coalition to do so.
Absolutely, and we got to find out who's teaching our kids. And I'm just going to say this: Edward Said, the first member, Edward Said was the first to translate different type of doctrine over there in these schools. And you have this other Rashida Khalidi, basically Middle Eastern Studies professor from the PLO. So fantastic! That's who's teaching the kids for $70,000. More good news: DEI. We get more and more companies and colleges walking away from it. The latest MIT, Fortune 100 companies, they're beginning to say this is unsustainable. We're out. Correct?
Yeah, that's right. And in fact, legislators are taking action. We've now abolished the DEI departments in public universities in 5 states, with more to come soon. And even left-wing tech companies in Silicon Valley have slashed DEI departments by up to 90%. They're realizing that it's bad for the bottom line, that it's bad for company culture, and that it pits employees against one another on the basis of their ancestry. This is wrong. It's wrong in every institution. And I, for one, will not stop fighting until it's gone everywhere in this country.
Absolutely. Chris, thanks so much for your great work. Appreciate you sharing with our audience. All right.
Thank you.
You got it. Meanwhile, next, I go one-on-one with Charlamagne the God to talk everything from the pressure he feels to endorse President Biden again to how he really feels about the vice president.
Hi, I'm Brian Kilmeade. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to click to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page. This is the only...
Presented by Georgia Calvin Smith on...
Two key far-right figures threaten to quit Israel's government if Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu agrees to the latest Gaza truce deal announced by US President Joe Biden. Israel's opposition has given its backing already, and Hamas has said it too would agree if Israel does. South Africa is set for a coalition government for the first time in 30 years as the ANC, the party that ushered in democracy under Nelson Mandela, loses its majority. So who might they team up with? We take a look. And Mexican voters look set to elect their first female president, with Claudia Sheinbaum from the ruling Morena party and the conservative opposition's Xochitl Galvez leading the way for Sunday's election, the vote overshadowed by violence with at least 25 candidates for local office assassinated. Good day or good evening to you, wherever you're watching. Thanks for joining us here on France 24. First up, 2 ministers in Israel's far-right coalition have threatened to quit if Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu agrees to a Gaza truce deal announced by US President Joe Biden. The far-right National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir and the Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich both said they would bring down the government if Netanyahu agreed to the proposal before Hamas was defeated. The latest 3-phase plan to end the war in Gaza has been backed by the Israeli opposition. Hamas also said it would agree to it if Israel does. Meanwhile, thousands of Israelis rallied in Tel Aviv on Saturday to demand the government accept the deal. Let's take a listen to some of what they had to say.
I feel today is a very important day. Biden spoke, and Biden said, we got it, there is a deal. And our government need to hear that even people like me, that we're not political, and we're not demonstrating on a regular basis. We think we have to take the deal. That's the right time to do it.
My sign says that President Biden cares about our hostages more than Netanyahu and his government does. Netanyahu only cares about his political survival, and he measures everything, including the lives of the hostages, in this aspect.
I think Benjamin Netanyahu will accept it because not listening to other parties in the government and cares about the hostages and care about Israel and not caring only about his political achievements and whether he's going to stay Prime Minister or not.
South Africa's African National Congress Party has lost its parliamentary majority for the first time since the end of apartheid. With 99% of votes counted, the ANC won just over 40% in Wednesday's election, which means the country is now headed for a new era of coalition governance. France 24's Jenny Shin takes a look at the possible partners for the ANC.
With some 40% of votes, it's the worst result for South Africa's ANC since the end of apartheid in 1994. Its leader and the country's president, Cyril Ramaphosa, could be forced to step down, with the party nominating another high-profile politician to the National Assembly. The ANC is now looking to usher in a new era of coalition politics by brokering a deal with another party to secure a parliamentary majority. The potential partners are the MK, the EFF, or the main opposition Democratic Alliance, the DA. The MK, led by former President Jacob Zuma, advocates nationalizing lands and banks and scrapping the constitution. In the scenario of a coalition, it would be a hard pill to swallow for the ANC, which struggled to revamp its reputation after the numerous corruption scandals of the Zuma era. Another hurdle to overcome, the rift between Ramaphosa and Zuma, who has long been bitter about his forced exit out of office in 2018.
The Economic Freedom Fighters, the EFF, is led by Julius Malema, a former leader of the ANC's youth wing. His pledge to remedy racial and economic inequality, which has resonated with many unemployed and disenfranchised black youth and middle-class students struggling to find decent jobs in a stagnant economy. Even if they are aligned on several issues such as land reform, fraught relations between Malema and some ANC factions could pose challenges for a possible coalition. The DA, which secured the most votes after ANC, is pro-business and market-friendly and says it will do its utmost to prevent an ANC coalition with its two competitors. The party says such a move would spook investors and spell a disaster for the South African economy. It's also promised a free market agenda at odds with the ANC's left-wing traditions. In any scenario, a partnership with any of these parties would mean significant policy concessions by the ANC and would mark the dawn of a new chapter in South African politics.
In India, the Prime Minister Narendra Modi looks on course for a third term in office, with exit polls predicting a third straight landslide for his alliance. The National Democratic Alliance, led by Modi's Hindu nationalist party, the BJP, is forecast to take nearly two-thirds of the 543 seats in Parliament. The final day of the 6-week vote wrapped up on Saturday, and Modi's victory is being treated as a foregone conclusion, even if analysts warn polls have been wrong in the past. Pavni Mitai is in New Delhi for France 24.
Voting has now ended in the world's biggest and most expensive elections. Over the last 6 weeks, hundreds of millions of people cast their votes, with the results expected on Tuesday, that is the 4th of June. Exit polls predict Prime Minister Modi will return for a record third term. Interestingly, also say that opposition parties may fare better than what was earlier expected. Now, during the course of our reporting, we spotted some interesting trends. One, that BJP is over-reliant on Prime Minister Modi for votes. As far as issues are concerned, economic issues like record unemployment and high inflation were top of mind for voters. And finally, BJP voters, some of them admitting to us that they were reluctantly voting for the BJP because they weren't as happy with its track record. Now, this election had its fair share of controversies as well. Opposition leaders accusing the BJP of weaponizing federal agencies against them, jailing their leaders and freezing their bank accounts. Prime Minister Modi was accused of making Islamophobic comments during election rallies, and then India's election agency was criticized for not taking tangible action. Finally, this election took place during record temperatures, extreme heat, and the ongoing heat wave has been blamed for lower voter turnout, as has voter apathy.
Elections are taking place this Sunday in Mexico, with voters looking set to elect their first female president. Two women lead the three-horse race: the former Mexico City Mayor Claudia Sheinbaum, the would-be successor of outgoing President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, and the conservative candidate Xochitl Gálvez. The vote has also been overshadowed by violence, with at least 25 candidates running for local office assassinated, according to local figures. Let's take a closer look.
It's the end of Mexico's bloodiest political campaign season as the country gears up for historic elections. As the country prepares to elect its first woman president, violence has marred the nation's democratic process. According to official government numbers, at least 25 candidates have been assassinated, a number which could be as high as 37, according to private security firms. In order to protect voters and polling stations from intimidations and threats, 27,000 soldiers and National Guard members have been deployed across the country. Furthermore, voting was suspended in 2 municipalities in the south due to the violence, drawing condemnation from observers.
Electoral processes must be free of violence, and it's the responsibility of the state to ensure that. Yesterday, we condemned the murder of another candidate. Obviously, this can discourage electoral participation. It should be a cause for concern.
With over 20,000 positions on the ballot, including Senate seats and several key mayoral and governor offices, as well as the presidency, this year is poised to be the country's biggest elections ever. And also for the first time in Mexico's modern history, the top two leading presidential candidates are women, Claudia Sheinbaum and Xochitl Gálvez.
As a woman, I think that whoever wins, she will take us forward. She will give us work and we will improve ourselves.
Mexico's next president will inherit a country with lagging economic growth and an elevated rate of violent crime, especially related to drug trafficking at the hands of the country's powerful cartels. They will also inherit a dire water crisis, with 85% of the territory being in a state of drought.
The Chinese spacecraft has touched down on the far side of the moon. The Chang'e 6 mission aims to collect rock and soil from the region for the first time. It's Beijing's second successful trip to the moon's south pole, which has become the focus of a growing rivalry between China, the US, Japan, and also India, which itself landed in the area last August. It's believed there may be ice in the region, which would be a huge boost for chances of establishing a human base on the moon. The 200-meter rainbow flag flowed through the streets of Bangkok as tens of thousands joined in the annual Pride Parade in the Thai capital. Participants celebrated the much-anticipated legalization of marriage equality, which would make the country the first in Southeast Asia to do so. The move has seen widespread endorsement from politicians, government agencies and major businesses. The story with Rachel Griffiths.
The rainbow flag brightens up the streets of Bangkok. Many took to the capital on Saturday to celebrate the start of Pride Month.
This is my first time joining Pride. I feel proud, overwhelmed, excited, and I have goosebumps. I am so happy to witness how far Thailand has come.
June is also set to be an important month in Thailand. The country is expected to legalize same-sex marriage as an equality bill heads for the final readings in the Senate. Thailand's Prime Minister expressed his joy at the progress being made.
Government and public sectors will work together to legalise same-sex marriage successfully, as well as gender recognition and sex work.
Last month, Thailand proposed a draft recognition act which would legally recognise and protect the rights of individuals across the gender spectrum and have their gender fully recognised. For many, this makes this year's Pride celebrations even more special.
This year's Pride Parade can be considered one of the biggest because it coincides with the passing of the same-sex marriage law, which will lead to other laws such as titles for different genders and sex worker laws.
The final reading of the same-sex marriage bill in the Senate is scheduled for June the 18th. If approved, it will be sent to the palace for the King's royal assent before it becomes law within 120 days.
Finally, in sports news, Real Madrid have been crowned European champions for a record 15th time after beating Borussia Dortmund at Wembley Stadium in London. The German side were the better of the two in the first half, but two chances went begging. In the second half, Dani Carvajal opened the scoring for Real, heading in from a corner in the 74th minute. Vinicius Jr. making it 2-0 shortly after. The win gives coach Carlo Ancelotti a 5th Champions League, and that's also a record. Let's get reaction from both teams.
Yeah, for me it's very special because I'm Real Madrid fan from years ago when I was so kid and a baby also. But yeah, for me it's a special moment, not only for the Champions League, it's for everything, for win the trophies with this club. And yeah, today is the final whistle of the season, and with these trophies for me and for the club is the most important trophy in the world for the clubs.
We were very disappointed in the dressing room. The players were very disappointed. But as we've already said, despite that we are proud. I said it to the lads in the dressing room. Even if it's the silver medal, we still wear it. It hurts to lose in a final. It's incredibly painful. But it's worth working hard every day to be able to play in games like this. And that's what we'll do again. We'll move forward and get going again next year.
And that about does it for the moment. Thanks for staying with us here on the France 24 Night Watch. See you next time.
Welcome to Access Asia, I'm Yuka Boye. Coming up in this edition. 14 pro-democracy leaders have been convicted of subversion in Hong Kong in the largest trial under the national security law imposed by Beijing. We'll hear from Amnesty International. North Korea has fired a barrage of suspected ballistic missiles days after it failed to put another spy satellite into orbit. So where does Pyongyang's space program stand? Police in Thailand are at war with monkeys. A new offensive aims to round up and send away thousands of them, but the marauders are hard to catch. 14 prominent pro-democracy activists have been found guilty in a...
This is Asia Now.
Good morning. It is 11 a.m. in Singapore and Hong Kong, 10 o'clock in Jakarta, and 8:30 in New Delhi. I'm Shahida Osman. At this hour, China's defense minister says the military stands ready to forcefully stop any efforts for independence, adding the prospect of a peaceful reunification is increasingly being eroded. He warns anyone who dares to separate Taiwan from the mainland will end in self-destruction. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky will address delegates at the Shangri-La Dialogue this hour as he seeks to rally support for his country amid Russia's gains in the war. And exit polls in India project a decisive win for the ruling National Democratic Alliance, putting Prime Minister Narendra Modi on course for a third term in office. The right-wing bloc is forecast to secure more than 350 seats, way past the 272 majority mark. China has vowed to ensure that Taiwan independence never succeeds. Defense Minister Dong Jun says Beijing remains committed to peaceful reunification as he addressed the Shangri-La Dialogue here in Singapore. Minister Dong Jun spoke at length on Beijing's stance on Taiwan, saying it lies at the core of China's interests. He blamed what he called malicious external forces for emboldening separatist forces on the island, taking a veiled swipe at the U.S.
中国依法处置涉台事务，完全是中国的内政，外部势力无权干涉。我们始终致力于和平统一，但这一前景正在遭到台独分子和外部势力的破坏，国家分裂的危险始终存在。中国人民解放军始终是捍卫祖国统一、无坚不摧的强大力量，将以及时、坚决、有力的作为遏制台独，确保其图谋永无得逞之日。谁以及时、坚决、有力的作为遏制台独，确保其图谋永无得逞之日？谁胆敢把台湾从中国分裂出去，必将粉身碎骨，自取灭亡。
The Chinese minister's speech comes a day after U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin addressed delegates at the summit, where he pushed to strengthen alliances in the Indo-Pacific. Admiral Dong said Beijing remains open to military communications with the U.S., but opposes exclusive military alliances with Asian nations.
中方的立场是一贯的，也是明确的，始终对交流合作持开放态度。当然，这需要我们双方来相向而行。我们认为，两军之间正因为有分歧，所以才要多交流。即使道不同，也不能搞对抗。关键是要坚持以和为贵，以稳为重，以信为本相处之道，为世界和地区和平提供更多的正面预期。
Asia's largest defense summit is taking place against the backdrop of several conflicts around the world, including wars in Gaza and Ukraine. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky will address the forum later today to rally support for his country, with Russia stepping up its attacks in recent months and making gains in the east and south of Ukraine. China's defense minister stressed that his country stands on the side of peace and dialogue.
在乌克兰危机上，中方始终以负责任的态度致力于全和。
Still ahead on Asia now, mediators from Qatar, Egypt, and the US call on Israel and Hamas to advance the ceasefire deal as outlined by President Joe Biden. And exit polls in India project a landslide win for the ruling government, handing Prime Minister Narendra Modi a record third term in office.
Votes 2024 comprehensive coverage on CMA.
Polling for India's mammoth general election has ended, and the exit polls are predicting a win for Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Many of them have forecast that his Bharatiya Janata Party and its allies could win more than 350 out of 543 elected seats in India's lower house of parliament. Exit polls, however, are not always accurate. Votes will be counted on Tuesday, and results are expected on the same day. The electronic voting machines have been sealed after the final ballots were cast in the 6-week-long election. Ahead of the counting day, a coalition of opposition parties called the India Bloc held a meeting in New Delhi to discuss their post-poll strategy. Asian Garg has more from New Delhi.
It was a show of unity from the opposition bloc
about how the extreme heat could prevent the world's most populous country from building the economy of the future. Mediators of the Gaza conflict have urged Israel and Hamas to finalize a ceasefire and hostage release deal. The plan outlined by U.S. President Joe Biden includes bringing immediate relief to people in Gaza and to the hostages and their families. But Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said there will be no formal end to the war as long as Hamas retains power. Two members of his coalition have threatened to withdraw from the government if he goes ahead with a deal that ends the war without destroying Hamas. However, opposition leader Yair Lapid said his party would support a deal. President Biden said the plan was an Israeli proposal. It would start with a 6-week ceasefire and Hamas releasing some hostages in exchange for hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. The second phase will see the release of all Israeli hostages and the complete withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza. The third phase would include a major reconstruction plan for Gaza. Hamas has said it views the plan positively. Later today, officials from Egypt, Israel, and the United States are scheduled to hold a meeting to discuss the reopening of the Rafah crossing. Situated between Gaza and Egypt, the crossing is the main gateway for transporting humanitarian aid into the enclave. Aiding and protecting vulnerable populations has become more crucial than ever as technological advancements transform warfare. The International Committee of the Red Cross frequently plays a pivotal role. CNA's Paul Sung spoke with ICRC President Mirjana Spoljaric, who is in Singapore, for the Shangri-La Dialogue about the challenges ahead and the future of warfare.
The future of warfare will be largely influenced by the accelerated development of new technologies and by the addition of artificial intelligence to how operations are conducted and how weapons are going to look like and how they're going to be employed in the future. Civilians and not to uphold the principle of prioritizing the preservation and the protection of human dignity.
Still ahead on Asia Now, we'll cross live to the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore, where Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky is set to make a speech at a session being attended by the defense ministers of Singapore and Malaysia. We'll be back after the break. It's 11:30 a.m. here in Singapore, where Asia's top defense summit, the IISS Shangri-La Dialogue, is underway. In a few minutes from now, we will be hearing from the Ukrainian president and Singapore and Malaysian defense ministers as they weigh in on global peace and regional stability amid raging wars in Gaza and Ukraine. But first, here are the headlines we are following this hour. China's defense minister says the military stands ready to forcefully stop any efforts for independence, adding the prospect of a peaceful reunification is increasingly being eroded. He warns anyone who dares to separate Taiwan from the mainland will end in self-destruction. Mediators from Qatar, Egypt, and the US call on Israel and Hamas to advance the ceasefire deal as outlined by President Joe Biden. Thousands rally in Tel Aviv, pressing on the Netanyahu government to bring back the hostages. And exit polls in India project a decisive win for the ruling National Democratic Alliance, putting Prime Minister Narendra Modi on course for a third term in office. The right-wing bloc is forecast to secure more than 350 seats, way past the 272 majority mark. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky is set to address the Shangri-La dialogue shortly.
Austin starts next Sunday at 8 on ABC and ABC iView.
Today, a major storm warning for WA's southwest as damaging winds caused blackouts of property damage in Bunbury. The search steps up for a woman trapped under the rubble of a Sydney townhouse after a huge explosion.
The time frame that we're operating in is still within a window of survivability, and hence the focus of effort to really be exploring the building as thoroughly as we can.
Support for South Africa's ANC slumps in the party's worst election result in 30 years. And proposed laws to impose lengthy prison sentences for spreading non-consensual deepfake pornography. Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Ruby Cornish. The West Australian city of Bunbury has been hit by another freak weather event, leaving 3 people in hospital and thousands of homes without power. It comes just a few weeks after a tornado tore through the regional city. Reporter Bridget MacArthur has more from Bunbury.
You might be able to see behind me, this is just a portion of the extent of the damage that was wreaked by that freak weather event last night. I actually was driving back from the pub that was on the main street because the power had gone out, and we actually came past here because this is our local pub, the Parade Hotel, and the damage then was extensive. There was debris everywhere. I mean, even today you can still see how much cleanup there is left to do. There were trampolines in people's ceilings. And last night I spoke to a woman who had come down. It was her birthday and she was staying at the Parade Hotel, and they were out for dinner when they got word that the roof had literally been ripped off of their room. Another young woman who I spoke to this morning actually was in the room at the time with her mum. She was down here for the hockey championships that they were having. She was supposed to be playing today actually, but instead she's going back to Perth because it's been such a traumatic event. As you can imagine, they were literally inside when the roof collapsed on them and had to crawl out from under that debris. So it's so thankful that we haven't had reports yet of any serious injuries. A few minor injuries though. There were 2 women who were taken from Parade Hotel and another woman who was taken to hospital from the Caravan Park. So a huge effort from all the emergency services last night, and a huge effort yet to come in terms of the cleanup.
Yeah, we're just having a look at some of those pictures of the damage there now. It's very significant. And it was not very long ago that there was a tornado in Bunbury as well. So how's the community feeling given that, Bridget?
Yeah, I mean, pretty shook. You'd think that maybe that they'd be used to it by now, but I think the tornado was just such an outlier and something that a lot of people here hadn't experienced before, that we were kind of joking yesterday, a lot of people, that, oh, you know, there's a storm coming, hope it's not another tornado. And so, I mean, people are pretty shocked actually that those things have come true. Maybe we shouldn't have been joking about it. And it does seem like this event was more localised than that one a few weeks ago, but the damage that it managed to wreak in just this little pocket is really overwhelming. And like everyone I spoke to said, the noise was just immense, and there was lightning as well at the same time. It just would have been a real chaotic scene, as you can imagine.
And the WA Department of Fire and Emergency Services will speak shortly about a major storm warning in place for the state southwest. We'll bring that to you when it happens. In other news, gun owners in Western Australia will automatically have them confiscated if they become the subject of a family and domestic violence complaint. The legal changes have been brought forward by the state government. The announcement follows the double shooting of a woman and her teenage daughter in Floreat by a gun owner who was looking for his estranged wife. Western Australian Premier Roger Cook says these laws are an appropriate response to an important problem.
Now, many people will say these are too tough, they go too far. And we believe the principal aim here should be to keep people safe. And if this precautionary approach simply provides that extra level of care, that extra level of caution to ensure that we don't allow a situation that's been subject to a family and domestic violence incident to escalate.
Police in Darwin say they're investigating an alleged domestic violence death in the city's northern suburbs yesterday. Officers responded to reports that a 36-year-old woman was unresponsive at a home in the suburb of Coconut Grove after midday on Saturday. A 43-year-old man was then arrested at the scene after handing himself into police. Police say the pair were known to each other. The crime scene remains in place, but no charges have been yet laid. Fire and Rescue New South Wales says a woman believed to be trapped under a pile of rubble following an explosion at a Western Sydney townhouse could still be alive. It's been almost a day since the massive blast flattened the Whalen property. Reporter Nabil Al-Nashar has more from the scene.
We know that an explosion affected around 4 units in a larger unit complex here on Waikanda Crescent in Wayland, according to New South Wales Search and Rescue Commissioner Jeremy Futrell. Now, rescuers have been working non-stop for the last 24 hours to try and rescue the missing woman, presumably still trapped somewhere in this rubble behind me. As it stands, there are a lot of unanswered questions still. For example, what exactly happened here yesterday? Presumably an explosion. What may have caused it? Potentially a gas leak. But while authorities are saying they're still investigating all of that, the priority is still this rescue operation, which is exactly how they're treating this right now. There have been several efforts so far to try and save this person, possibly still trapped alive under all this debris. Human chains of firefighters have worked tirelessly through the night under the downpour of the massive rain we saw last night to try and remove the debris and find her under the ruins. Emergency services are using specialized listening and seismic equipment to detect sounds from underneath the ruins, and detection dogs were also brought and ran over the scene to see if they can detect anything, but they haven't been able to indicate that they found something. Here's Fire and Rescue Commissioner Jeremy Futrell talking about the survivability of this person.
This is still well within the window for someone to survive. Certainly the time frame that we're operating in is still within a window of survivability, and hence the focus of effort to really be exploring the building as thoroughly as we can, trying to make access to either physically inspect or with the use of our tools to inspect each possible area.
The efforts are still continuing as we speak behind us here, although I must say the action has slowed down a bit over the last couple of hours.
Yeah, and it will get more urgent, I imagine, as that window of survivability closes. Nabil, we've heard that gas may have been a factor in this. What can you tell us about any potential gas leaks connected to this incident?
That's right, Ruby. So fire and rescue, we know that fire and rescue, more people reach for their heaters, and there's higher demand for gas during the winter months, which we're in at the moment.
Nabil Al-Nashar there. People who share sexually explicit material that's been digitally created and altered will face serious criminal penalties as part of legislation being introduced into federal parliament. Under the legislation, sharing of non-consensual pornographic deepfake images will carry a penalty of up to 7 years in jail. Attorney General Mark Dreyfus says the move was prompted by an increase in the material online, which he describes as a damaging form of abuse. Online safety advocate, researcher and lawyer Noelle Martin says it's a difficult issue to regulate.
You need to tackle perpetrators who potentially live overseas, and Australia is limited by jurisdiction. I mean, this is a global issue that's borderless, and you know, we're not going to. Hopefully we will, but it's going to be difficult to actually hold people accountable, even though we have laws. It's not even just about identifying them, it's actually bringing them to account, to justice. Whether or not we're going to see, you know, the resources given to law enforcement to investigate, and then are we going to see, you know, the courts actually bringing people to justice. And so there are so many challenges with these laws, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have them in place. I think that it's a step in the right direction, but dealing with it in practice is going to be a challenge.
Former Treasurer Josh Frydenberg is considering a return to federal politics. Mr Frydenberg lost the Melbourne seat of Kooyong to independent Monique Ryan at the last election. Political reporter Evelyn Manfield has more from Parliament House.
Former Treasurer Josh Frydenberg, we understand, is considering a return to federal politics. He lost that seat of Kooyong to independent Monique Ryan at the last election. Now, the Liberal Party has already pre-selected a candidate for the Melbourne seat of Kooyong in 31-year-old Amelia Hamer, a former finance professional. But on Friday, we heard about a proposal to change some of the electoral boundaries in Victoria. So that would see the seat of Higgins abolished, and it would see part of that old seat of Higgins, part of that would then be claimed by Kooyong. And so the ABC under to abolish a seat in Victoria and add a new one to WA. So this is definitely a story to watch.
Evelyn Manfield there. Well, results from South Africa's election show that the party of the late Nelson Mandela, the ANC, has lost its majority for the first time in 30 years. We'll now have to find coalition partners to stay in power. Many voters appear to have blamed the ANC for rising levels of crime and unemployment, as well as corruption, power cuts and water shortages.
It had been a slow and steady day, and then this. The former president, now the head of the upstart MK party, an unexpected challenge to the ANC. Already reeling from voter anger over economic mismanagement and corruption scandals.
Jacob Zuma has created quite a stir here. He's made a rock star entrance. His party came third with an unexpectedly strong showing. Take a lot of votes away from the ANC.
And still trying to take more, he announced he had evidence of election rigging, said he was considering a demand for a full revote. The results aren't official yet, but they're clear. The ANC has lost the outright majority it held for 30 years. The most dramatic political shift since the end of apartheid. This is uncharted territory.
We ask for all electoral stakeholders to please remain calm, for leaders to lead this nation at this time, and for voices of reason to continue to prevail.
The ANC was born out of the struggle against apartheid, the violence of white minority rule that kept black people separate and unequal.
There's Mr. Mandela, Mr. Nelson Mandela, a free man.
The moment of triumph, Nelson Mandela released from prison, the first black president in South Africa's new democracy. The downfall marked by Jacob Zuma. He presided over a period of rampant corruption. Now he's making a comeback.
Understandably, I'm very disappointed.
But this ANC veteran says the party hasn't recovered since then.
We have failed. We talk about the renewal of the ANC, and it would take the form of making sure that elements who are really corrupt are removed from the organization. And we really failed to act decisively.
Villagers in northern Papua New Guinea have spoken of warning signs they received before a landslide flattened an entire village. The landslide devastated PNG's Molitaka district 9 days ago, killing scores of villagers. Survivors say they heard 2 loud cracks in the hours leading up to the disaster before the side of the mountain finally gave way in the middle of the night. PNG officials say there's still a threat of further landslides, which may mean around 8,000 villagers need to be relocated. Papua New Guinea correspondent Arian Farr is on the ground.
It's now been 9 days since a massive landslide flattened a remote village in Papua New Guinea not far from here. Locals are still using sticks and shovels to dig, desperate to recover their loved ones. Only 8 bodies have been found so far, but these survivors haven't given up hope of recovering others. On Friday, Papua New Guinea's Prime Minister James Marape visited the site, pledging about $8 million to help with the recovery. The government has also promised to send in heavy machinery, but so far there's still no sign of the diggers and excavators that locals say they desperately need. As you can see, this is an extremely remote and mountainous part of PNG, and getting help in is proving to be an ongoing challenge.
Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has insisted there will be no ceasefire in Gaza as long as Hamas remains in power. It's raised questions about an offer that was endorsed by US President Joe Biden yesterday. Hamas has provisionally welcomed the 3-stage deal, which President Biden said was proposed by Israel. Mr. Netanyahu has referred to the deal as a non-starter. The decision comes amid rising pressure within Tel Aviv, with protesters taking to the streets over Israel's handling of the war. Family members of hostages are urging Netanyahu to accept a ceasefire deal.
We are here for one reason. We are here to say to Mr. Netanyahu, to Mr. Prime Minister, we are demanding that you will accept your deal, the deal that you suggest to the Hamas, you suggest to Qatar, and we must seal the deal and bring them home immediately.
Australian healthcare workers returning from Gaza have described the region as hell on earth, with many patients forced to take over-the-counter pain relief drugs after life-threatening amputations. More than 36,200 Palestinians, almost 14,000 of them children, have been killed since the October 7 Hamas attack. Scarlett Wong, a clinical psychologist for Doctors Without Borders, visited Gaza in March. She's now back in Sydney and spoke to our reporter Chantel Al-Khoury about helping locate and support unaccompanied children.
So I'm a mum of 3. I have twins and they were in the neonatal unit, the NICU. And so what really struck me was the new mums in Gaza. So MSF was, so that really struck me and has stayed with me as I've come back.
You can catch more on that story in tonight's 7 p.m. news. In India, polls have closed following 6 weeks of voting in national elections. Nearly 1 billion people were eligible to take part in the world's largest democratic poll. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's BJP is widely tipped to win a 3rd term in office. Counting of votes will begin on Tuesday. Mexico's election campaign has been labelled the bloodiest in history following the murder of another candidate. Jorge Huerta Cabrera, who was a local council candidate for the Green Party in central Mexico, was shot dead on Friday. That brings the total number of candidates killed on the campaign trail to 37. Mexico is currently holding the largest set of elections in the country's history. They're voting for a new president, both houses of Congress, and local officials. For millions of Australians, chronic pain can be a challenge they have to confront every day. In South Australia, an Adelaide hospital has teamed up with young people experiencing chronic pain to help raise awareness about the condition.
For the last few years, Adelaide teenager Kate Smith has been battling constant pain, beginning after a panic attack caused her headache, which never really went away.
We got brain scans and everything. There was a time where I thought, do I have brain tumours? Am I going to die? What's going on? I had no idea what chronic pain was until my doctor said, you've got chronic pain.
Her headaches became so debilitating, she worried she might have to drop out of school.
It was just so impossible to get to school and to try and complete assignments and learn content when I was so unfamiliar with this pain and I had no idea what was going on.
3 years on, and Kate has learned to live with her chronic pain. Now, with the help of the Women's and Children's Hospital, she's using her experience to help others. The 17-year-old shared her story in a video campaign to help other young people manage their pain and continue their schooling.
The more we can improve those conversations so that we can put practical strategies in place to help children move, to help children have find support and to get better. That's what we need to do.
It's estimated 1 in 5 Australians are affected by chronic pain. For young people, this can be particularly disruptive, with research revealing South Australian students with the condition are missing out on more than half of their schooling. Kate's doctors believe there's still a chance her headaches may disappear as she gets older. For her family, their focus is on helping others on their chronic pain journey.
You look at her, you don't know she's got chronic pain. But if she had a really bad day, you wouldn't see her because she's in a bedroom having a sleep. So it's invisible, and therefore we need to raise awareness.
Powering through adversity to raise awareness for an often invisible condition. Will Hunter, ABC News, Adelaide.
Time for sport with Jared Coote.
Edwards has been ruled out of Game 1 of the State of Origin with a quad injury. Edwards was set to make his New South Wales debut at fullback on Wednesday night, but felt some tightness in his left quadricep at training, with scans today revealing a strain. James Tedesco will now replace Edwards at fullback, but the Panthers player will remain in camp.
The approaching cold front from the west means cloud will build up again. After a wet day today, showers in Perth will ease tomorrow. Darwin will be sunny with a top of 33 degrees. And that's the latest from ABC News for now. Remember, you can keep up to date with all the latest at news.abc.net.au and, as always, on ABC iView. I'm Ruby Cornish. Thank you so much for your company this afternoon. Stay with us.
The two main labor unions in Nigeria have declared an indefinite strike as from Monday over what the term is a disagreement on a new minimum wage. The government, the Nigerian Labour Congress and the Trade Union Congress both had issued warnings on Friday that they will proceed with the strike should the government fail to heed their grievances over the minimum wage requirement. The two unions on Tuesday had refused government proposal to peg it at 60,000 naira. The Friday meeting was a no-show by the government representatives, a move that angered the two unions. They are also demanding the government to stop the electricity tariff hike effected last month. Electricity rates more than double for some consumers in April, while the government will save at least $788 million in subsidies this year, according to authorities. It is the latest measure by President Bola Tinubu's government to cut costs as Africa's most populous country struggles with declining revenue due to dwindling investments and chronic oil theft. With final election results slated for Sunday, the African National Congress Party, the ANC, is still leading with 42% of the provisional results, with 65% of the vote counted as of Saturday in South Africa. Meanwhile, the voter welcomed the results.
So far I can say I'm happy because I saw a lot of youth coming to vote this year, and then they vote for the right reasons this time. I hope each and every youth got satisfied now because they voted to the party that they think is good and is going to do better for us.
I'm happy about this result because there's too much parties. I think the coalition will make things become easy for us.
Meanwhile, the Democratic Alliance is second on around 23% of the vote. Zuma's MK party had 12% and the EFF around 9%. With this result, seems NC is headed for a coalition government.
That one party that can react like the MK and the EFF. By the way, I'm an EFF member for life, but I understand the visions of the MK, for example. So I stand with both of them because they stand for the same thing at the end of the day.
The ANC support has steadily declined from a high of nearly 70% of the vote 20 years ago as South Africa grapples with deep socio-economic problems, including widespread poverty and now one of the worst unemployment rates in the world at 32%. A family in agony. This is the mother of a 21-year-old Utah man, Tyler Thompson, who was one of the 3 Americans arrested after an ill-fated attack on the presidential palace in the Congo. The family said they are waiting for answers about the fate of their son from their home in a Salt Lake City suburb.
On Sunday morning, Marcel's mom came to my door, and when I answered it, she was like, "Are you Tyler Thompson's mom?" And I was like, "Yeah." And she's like, "I don't know how to tell you this, but while the boys were in Africa, Marcel's dad has been shot in front of the boys, and they have been taken into custody, and now we're getting pictures, and they're being beaten, and we don't necessarily know what's going on."
Thompson had traveled to Africa in early April with his former high school football teammate Marcel Malanga for what his family believed was an all-expenses-paid vacation funded by Marcel's father, Christian Malanga.
At this point, we've just spent a lot of time trying to figure out what to do, right? Like, we're working with the U.S. Embassy, we're working with an attorney here, we're trying to find an attorney there, and really we've been very tactical, logistic, focused on trying to get anything and everything done that we can to get him home.
A U.S. Embassy spokesperson in Congo, Monica Shine, said Thursday they had yet to gain access to the American prisoners and did not know whether they will appear in court.
42 and 59 seconds. Standing by for main engine ignition. We have main engine start. The engines and turbo pumps coming up to flight speed. And liftoff. Liftoff of the Soyuz booster. Progress 80.
This is the first electronic gaming fair in Morocco, Rabat, bringing together developers, startups, and gamers. It features 4 main sections, including a display area with over 70 exhibitors, startups, and game developers. Morocco is taking advantage of this expo to highlight some of the challenges and how to go about them. There are some challenges to developing games in Morocco, but after the state's interest in this field, and especially after this fair, the work will hopefully become easier with time. I have developed 6 or 7 games, but 3 of them were especially successful. The games that I developed are horror games, so they're intended for people over 12 years. The expo had a conference section that brought together 50 industry experts. The event also featured a tournament hosting 100 players, as well as a session that promoted exchange and cooperation among players from around the world. Every emerging player needs an opportunity to prove themselves and to take the pressure off themselves so that When they participate in international tournaments outside Morocco, they are prepared and have experience, especially the experience needed to compete with other countries. Many people see the world of gaming as one that concerns men more, but I think that even women are interested in gaming. Personally, I know women who play games with me, like League of Legends or Valorant, but at the same time, I feel that there are more men playing than women. According to the Ministry of Youth, Culture and Communication, the Morocco Gaming Expo aims to bolster the burgeoning gaming industry in the country. The Ministry of Youth, Culture and Communication's objective is setting up this fair is also to promote the Rabat Gaming City. Rabat Gaming City is a city dedicated to gaming, which will be located in Rabat. It will allow...
Thank you for watching and privilege of your time. This is Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir Woodman. Have a good life.